The next item is something that was requested at our last meeting. This is by Director Waldron, requested that the following resolutions be included on our agenda and offered for discussion. They're resolutions from the City of Newport, the towns of Portsmouth, Jamestown, and Middletown, and they, I'm sure you've all read through them. They reference various opposition or concern about any consolidation of the Turnpike and Bridge Authority with the Department of Transportation. Do we have a motion to receive?
I'll move.
There's a motion and a second to receive the documents. Any discussion?
Director Alvitti, could you please give some direction as to what the status of this whole thing is? Since we've got so much opposition, it'd be nice if the board knew exactly where we stand.
Yes, I'd be happy to. The bill and the legislation for the merger of the two agencies has been submitted. It was submitted some time ago, early in last year's budget process. Of course, as you all know, the legislature has not convened to ratify a new budget, nor have they convened on any other issues, this being one of them. So the bill sits. The legislature, the last word that I have is that the legislature will convene on the budget after the November election. And the governor and DOT is certainly willing and able and wanting to go forward with the legislation. If there are restrictions on the amount of business that the legislature can do during this modified session, it certainly still is our intent to follow up in January with the new legislative session with this. So it is in the hopper. A lot depends, of course, on the process going forward with the legislature itself, but it has been accepted and introduced into the legislature.
Okay.
With the resolutions, we have resolutions all the time on DOT projects that we do across the state, some of which are fact-based and some of which are political-based. I believe that once we did a reading of them, we certainly take them all seriously at DOT. Once we did a reading of the resolutions, they seem to have a common theme. And I'll use Newport's as an example. There are several whereases, most of which are very subjective, some of which have data associated with them. The subjective ones, what could you say? I mean, they're subjective comments, they're people's opinions. The ones that contain data are maybe accurate, but the way that the data is presented and the mannerism in which it was intended to sway the opinion is certainly misleading. And I'll go down a few just to give you a sense of what we're thinking at DOT. In the Newport resolution, if you take a look at that, the first whereas is that Rhode Island Turnpike and Bridge Authority was created in 1954, and it goes on to explain what it was meant to do. Mount Hope Bridge, the construction of the Claiborne Pell Bridge. What's left out of this whereas is a very important aspect of that legislation, and that is that the authority actually dissolves upon full payment of the debt related to those bridges. And when it dissolves, it is automatically reassumed. Those bridges and the responsibility for them are reassumed by DOT. So it's not a matter of whether or not Rhode Island Turnpike and Bridge is merged with DOT. It's a matter of when it happens.
Well, can I make a comment?
Director Morse.
Since we are always, okay, in a maintenance mode on these bridges, and those maintenance modes require us to continue, okay, to issue bonds and so on. I don't see any foreseeable future when that would just automatically happen in the near future, even with the bond offerings we have now, because I just assume we'll just have more bond offerings to keep these bridges in the condition that we want them to be in.
Well, therein lies the problem.
Yeah, it's a continuous flow.
If you project ahead and you look at the management of bond issuances by the Turnpike and Bridge, and you project ahead, you can see that the currently authority has bonded really almost to their limit. I think the debt ratio as of the last issuance was 3.1.
Yeah.
Which is relatively high, right?
Right.
Right. And that's not good. That's not healthy for an agency. And the payment of that debt is going over the next several years, take more and more of the revenue that is used, that should be used for the construction and maintenance of these bridges. It's going to take it and it has to be dedicated to the repayment of the debt, which means one of two things are going to happen. Therein lies the next comment made by the Newport, whereas RIPA currently collects and uses dedicated revenue to operate and maintain the Newport Belt Bridge. Well, the fact of the matter is, if you look at the financials, that are part of your packet today, you will see that that is not entirely accurate, or at least it's misleading. It would lead one to believe that the tolls that are collected are sufficient to operate the agency. And in fact, 42% of the revenue, almost half of the revenue that keeps the authority afloat is derived from DOT and the gas tax.
That's true.
That only 50%, 53%, 4% is actually derived from the tolls that are collected. So the misconception, I think, that is among some of these cities and towns and politicians that wrote these resolutions is that they think somehow that the authority is well funded through its own resources of tolling and self-sufficient in that. The fact of the matter is not. Almost half of their operations are subsidized by Rhode Island DOT, and without that subsidy, the authority would go bankrupt. So therein lies another misconception, I think, in the public that is little known.
Director, if I could ask you this question, what's the actual piece of legislation that was introduced? Do you know what the bill number is?
I don't off the top of my head, but I'm sure that Director Silvera has a copy of it and can provide it to you.
What I would suggest is that, the board of directors of this authority, it's not up to us. We are the policymakers appointed by the governor related to the operation of the Turnpike and Bridge Authority.
Yep.
What I see the sentiment from the different communities that are probably most impacted by it. I think there are a lot of questions and everything else. And again, we're not going to answer that today. I think that
I'd like an opportunity here since the door is open.
Sure. Well, what I was going to say, Director, is that perhaps in a legislative hearing, when the bill would be fully vetted and first introduced, and then in the traditional committee hearing process in the legislature, I think that would be the more proper forum for cities and towns to weigh in. They've made the authority aware of their concerns, and I think a lot of it is, I just did a quick search. I don't actually see the piece of legislation. I certainly know there's been no hearing on it. I don't know, do you remember who the prime sponsor was of the legislation?
I don't. We'll get that information to you.
Mm-hmm. So, I mean, we don't have any action on our agenda in terms of opposition or support for a merger, and I don't know that that would necessarily be appropriate for this board to take a position on a piece of legislation that obviously is beyond our own control. So,
right. I certainly agree with you on that. On the subject of it being on our agenda as a matter of discussion, I'd like to continue my discussion of it.
Sure, that's fine. Take all the time you'd like.
Thank you. And I think at a time that is appropriate, as we near that legislative session where there will be hearings. Prior to that, we would certainly welcome the opportunity to have DOT and governor's staff brief the board on the logic, the data, the finances, and the management outlook that is coupled with this initiative. I think all of those aspects are very important. The next whereas goes to that issue. Says, whereas the Department of Transportation owns and maintains all the state secondary bridges and has not done the same to maintain the safety of the bridges under its purview. Well, again, in the statistics that are related to that are set forth in this resolution are again misleading. At a reading, they would indicate that DOT is doing nothing about the problem that is decades old with our bridges in the state. But the problem goes beyond the actual sufficiency of the bridges. And 5 years ago now, the legislature ratified roadworks. And roadworks changed the basis of this part of this resolution, this particular whereas. That, in fact, I think it's evident to everybody on the board that there have been some major changes at DOT, not only in the way that our bridges are now beginning to show improvement and be maintained. We have over 200 bridges right now that are under construction throughout the state. This would have never happened if not for the roadworks legislation, but it also would not have happened if many of the elements of the roadworks legislation that are not entirely part of the public discussion, but were very important parts of the legislation. The transparency issues, the need for us to report monthly on the on-time and on budget aspects of every project that we're doing, over 200 projects. The need for us to have a financial house in order and have a 10-year plan that is fiscally funded, fully funded, so that the plan is real and executable, as we have during the last 6 years. I'm sure the visible signs of the construction is proof that that plan is working. But it also goes to the management and the financial controls that were put in place at DOT to provide a stable, predictable, and sustainable revenue stream into the department. And it lies in the new efforts that we have made during the last 4 years, where over $400 million in additional competitive grants were awarded to our DOT from the federal government, over and above our base funding, federal funding from the federal government. Certainly create a new DOT that is very different than the one that's described in this particular whereas. And the governor sees the improvements not only in the infrastructure, but also in the management and controls and future of DOT, that she would like to apply those same metrics and those same policies and that same kind of management. And there would be a real benefit to that. That, in fact, instead of looking forward, quite the inverse of what is alleged in some of the other parts of this resolution, where they allege that DOT, the purpose of the merger would be for DOT to take funding from Rhode Island Turnpike and Bridge. Well, quite the opposite is true. We are already funding 42% of the agency's budget. And in the future, one of two things is going to happen. Either Rhode Island DOT is going to have to fund more of it because of the debt balloon that's coming, that was created at the agency. But either we're going to have to increase our subsidies to the agency in order for it to stay solvent, or if that doesn't happen, there's going to have to be an increase in the tolls that are assessed to the people that use the bridge in order to...
Director Alviti, can I just interrupt for a moment, okay? Because I think one of the things that has hit me that you basically stated was the fact that at this particular time, you are actually, the DOT is actually repairing and trying to improve over 200 bridges in the smallest state in the union, okay? And I think the fact that the federal government has come to the aid of Rhode Island because of our poor roadways is the history of the DOT. And I think that's the battle that you're having to face, that I don't think people have confidence that you do have an ongoing plan to prevent that from happening in the future.
Yeah, here's the thing about that aid, okay? That aid could have very well come to Rhode Island for decades had the department conducted itself in a manner that attracted the awards. They didn't.
That's true.
And
That's we're in this situation.
In the 4 years previous to this administration that's currently at DOT, they were able to apply for and successfully get about $20 million of federal funding. During the last 4 years, we have applied for and received over $400 million worth of additional federal funding. And that didn't come to us because we simply applied for it or that the federal government was doing a bailout. It came because we have demonstrated our ability not only to do that amount of construction, but to immediately and efficiently put that money to work in creating jobs and renovating our infrastructure. If during the last 4 years, we didn't change and we did not conduct ourselves in a manner that attracted those additional funds, we would not have gotten that $400 million. The federal government did not come and bail us out. They did not come because we just had a need, but they came in part because certainly our congressional delegation put their shoulder into getting us the funding. But that shoulder and the shoulder of the federal government came after we demonstrated at DOT that we had the ability and the pipeline created and a proper plan and proper projects that addressed the needs of each one of the grant opportunities that were specifically targeted by a new group in DOT to go and get those grants. And that is an important aspect too of the merger, because right now there have been no federal grant opportunities that have been made available to Rhode Island Turnpike and Bridge. And with our grant success that we could bring to the agency, we can see that in the future, a good amount of federal funding could be made available and put into the revenue pipeline that in the future could avert the toll increases that are looming ahead if the agency stays operating in the current mode. So grants don't just happen, Director. They happen when the grantee shows the ability to be able to effectively use that funding and has a demonstrated success in doing so. And that's the way DOT got the money.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you. I appreciate the director, and obviously we all respect and we think you've done a wonderful job. Having been on this board a while, you'll recall history before you came to power at DOT, that when we used the word subsidize, it was the General Assembly, who's the policymaking body for the state of Rhode Island, that placed the Jamestown Bridge and the Secana River Bridge under the Turnpike and Bridge Authority. So as you well know, the Newport Bridge has had carried both the Mount Hope and Newport Bridge for a long time. So when you use the word subsidize, I know, obviously, you know that the gas tax money came over to the Turnpike and Bridge Authority to also assist with the support of the Secana Bridge as well as the Jamestown Bridge, which prior to your tenure were not well maintained by the DOT, to speak to what Director Morse is talking about. So when we talk about the gas tax, I believe that it's not just the toll users of the Newport Bridge that are carrying Secana, Jamestown, and Mount Hope. I believe that the General Assembly, the policymaking body, saw fit to utilize that gas tax to support those, enormous structures as well.
No, Mr. Chairman, I'm sure you, having sat on the board for as long as you do, have seen the financials. Okay, you pretty much know, and if you don't, you should, that the money that is being provided from the gas tax revenue that would normally go to DOT for transportation purposes is much, much more than the actual expenditures on two bridges that it would supposedly came to the authority on.
So supposedly they did, Director. I was here. They were under DOT's care, and they're here now. We can go through a discussion of the Turnpike and Bridge Authority if you'd like, Director. But I think we've heard these resolutions.
The matter is, if you're going to discuss that particular item, funding that's coming, that a portion of that money certainly is being used for the maintenance of the two bridges that you got at the same time that money was legislated to you. But the actual amount is much more than what is needed to maintain those two bridges, and is being used as part of the general revenue to support the other bridges. So the facts are the facts. And when we provide our briefing to you, we will have a breakdown of that so that you can see clearly that what's coming to the agency is accurately described as a subsidy rather than a compensation for two bridges. It's much more than compensation for two bridges. It goes to the general revenue stream, a good portion of it, and is used for other purposes that involve other bridges in the agency's responsibilities.
I think it speaks to the idea that we need to have legislative hearings and let the actual policymakers, the elected officials, let them make the decision. And then
no, I agree. I agree. I just needed, since this was put on the agenda and the record is being affected by various political resolutions from certain people, I needed to go on the record with the agency to clear up some of the misconceptions I think that these resolutions create.
I think that's fair. And just when you say certain people, I live in the East Bay. You know, the city of Newport, the town of Portsmouth, the town of Jamestown, the town of Middletown, Those aren't just politicians. Those are people that use the bridge every day, use the bridges every day. Any other discussion at all on this matter?
Mr. Chair, if I could just briefly address a couple of things that Director Alviti said. I do not have a copy of any bill that's been submitted to the General Assembly. As soon as one is identified, I assure the other members of the Board of Directors that I will circulate it immediately. But I have checked. I don't have a copy. The only copy I saw was a very, very early draft that I'm certain has probably seen some revisions since that very early draft. So I will circulate that among the board as soon as I see it. The other thing, Director Alviti, to your point regarding federal funding, I just want to make the point that we've been very aggressive in speaking to the federal delegation. They've been very supportive of providing help for us if we need it. We think we're pretty fiscally healthy as it is. We're running a lean and mean budget for the coming fiscal year, but I have been in touch with the entire federal delegation, and they've been very supportive of funding that could come to us. Federal funding does not come without strings attached, and they would be strings attached to a 91-year-old bridge and a 51-year-old bridge and several other bridges. So and then 10 minor bridges and roadways. So all of that is very much on our radar screen, and I just wanted to mention that. And the last point is the gas tax money comes directly from legislation that was passed that directly gives us a small portion of the gas tax that's collected, and I just wanted that to be clear as well.
Any other discussion? Thank you for that. We've received these resolutions. The next item of business is a proposed collective bargaining agreement